Yeah. 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 Okay.
Hello and welcome to Afrospace with me, Adetunji Omotola, and my co-host, Yasha Grace. Afrospace is a weekly show that brings you political happenings in Africa, as well as economics, lifestyle, and much, much more. Today, we're very, very pleased to have with us Davidson. Dr. Israel Davidson is a senior lecturer at the Newcastle Business School in Northumbria University. He's a chartered accountant by profession, and he's also a former presidential candidate in the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Welcome to Afrospace, Dr. Israel Davidson.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, Dr. Israel, today is the 30th of June, and we also are coincidentally coming on the show along with the 60th Independence Day of the DR Congo. And you went viral in a video where you talked about a matter and you asked who did this to us, and a very emotional conversation where you said you went soul searching for thoughts on Africa. And you mentioned in that video a statement that was made by former South African head of state, P.W. Botha. And could you tell us what that statement was, and particularly what about that statement concerns you about what he said about Black people?
Thank you, Yasha and Ade, for the opportunity to be here. It's a very great one. Now, the former president of South Africa, Botha, everybody, you remember the apartheid era. His mentality works in a way that he could not see anything good about the Black race. And so in 1988, in order to justify apartheid in South Africa, so what he did was he made a statement that Africans, I don't want to use the word Black, Africans are not mentally gifted, not brainy enough to be able to govern a society. The reason he said was that where they give him political power, they abuse it and use it to enrich themselves. And where given weapons, they use it to kill themselves. So when I listened to that, it troubled me quite a lot, because although he's racist, but then if you look at the statistics of leadership in Africa, you can't help tracing some of those points he made. Now, does that reflect Africans? Absolutely no. What has happened is that the leadership in power at the time, 1988, even up till now, these were leadership that were totally created by our colonial masters. They conditioned them to behave the way they are through a number of strategies. One of them is that our colonial masters had a strategy to make sure they're rob us of true leadership. And those strategies were perpetuated through assassinations. They were perpetuated through creating, military coups, creating safe haven for looted wealth. And therefore, some of these leaders, even those who were willing, to exercise decisions in favor of their country, could not, because the examples that were set, either frightens them or give them the opportunities of self-enrichment. So in summary, that statement does not actually totally reflect Africans.
Look, Doc, we are in diaspora, and we know that there are a number of things that affect us, particularly issues around diaspora voting. And I know also that in Nigeria, particularly when you want to do something there, they said, look, you're not on the ground, when you criticize the country or the leadership, they say that you have to come home and run. Now, why did you, as an active citizen, why did you, as part of your active citizenry, why did you decide as a lecturer in the UK, why did you decide to go and run for the presidency, the biggest job in Nigeria? What made you take that very bold and daring decision, even frightening for men?
This is $1 million question. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, well, a lecturer has no experience of political, such a political minefield as high as the presidency. Look, let me tell you, I've traveled quite extensively. Not on holiday. I am engaged in professional development consultancy across different parts of the world, from China to Russia, South Africa, you name them. And that gave me an opportunity. Let me tell you, the first time I arrived in China, China, and what I saw marveled me. And one of the things I did was I began to count people and their parts. I just wanted to make sure that the people I was seeing were the same as Africans. So I said 1 head, 2 hands, 2 legs. I said, wow. So everybody actually is like us. So why is it that we're not getting things right as we should? So, I began to think. And the other thing is that when I was in Russia, I created such a standard that KGB kidnapped me, for about 1 hour, and they interrogated me heavily. And in the final analysis, the guy said, why can't you help your own country? You have such enormous skills. So I'm just telling you how these things were building. And finally, I think what has happened here is that I looked at the experience of those who are currently in politics. And I counted it. Those experiences include corruption, political assassinations, mismanagement of the economy, lack of consideration for others. And I said, these are not qualities for leadership, and I don't need to have them. If that's all that it takes to be able to operate at the presidential level, I'm a professional. I'm a chartered accountant. I specialize in budgetary control systems. I have a PhD in budgetary control systems. I have an MBA. And moreover, I've traveled quite extensively. I've been exposed to great countries. So I think I have what it takes better than those who are currently running the organization, right in the country. And I felt, I could do a better job. That was why I decided to get into, to contest at the time.
All right, Doc. Like Adetunji put it, very, very brave move. And especially because you were coming from diaspora and having to come back home and convince people back on the ground that you're the man for the job surely would have been quite a bit of a task. So what advice would you have, Doc, for people who are watching the show and have any political ambitions or aspirations, particularly those away from home and maybe, talking more to the younger people? What would you say to them to encourage them to get into politics?
I think the first thing, Nyasha, is this. It's a very good question. The first thing is, if you want to get into politics, is you need to be well educated. You have to be. Now, well educated does not mean paper qualification. Look, there's a very big difference between the ability to store information inside his brain and then reproduce it and being educated. These are two separate things. When you're educated, you see things from different perspectives. When you're educated, you are more patient. When you're educated, you are more considerate. When you are educated, you want to be able to do things for the benefit of the society. So that's what I mean by being educated. So you have to be, first of all, be educated. And I think the other thing then is that you need to know the reason why you want to run. If your purpose of wanting to run is to enjoy all the benefits of the office, then you don't deserve to be there. And so you need to know why you want to run. And I think finally, the major part of it is that in African politics, finance is important. But what I've realized here is that if you are well educated to the point that you begin to appeal to the grassroots. You don't need a lot of finance to be able to be recognized. I think there was an example in Kenya of a very young man who had no money. It's not that, he was still in university or something, and he ran for office and he won. He displaced the incumbent. So I think that these are the three things that I believe that, one has to put into consideration before he dabbles into politics.
Doc, it will be difficult to not get your thoughts on what has been going on in the United States with regards to the African American community. We have seen George Floyd, knee on his neck, 8 minutes, 46 seconds by a white officer, Derek Chauvin. And we've seen even after that, so many other black people. I think a gentleman called Brooks, Rashawn Brooks, who was in a car. And we saw the altercation with the police, he was shot twice and he was killed. And even after killing him, they put their feet on him. They were stepping on him. And we've seen also around Europe, even in the UK, there's been a lot of, movement, Black Lives Matter UK. And we know that slavery ended more than 200 years ago. And since then, we've had a black president in America. Now, given all of this tensions that are happening in the US and the fact that, there's so much at stake, there's a presidential election, the president is obviously, all the evidence points to the fact that it's racist. What advice would you give to African Americans? Because there's some people who say they should come back to Africa. We know Ghana has been doing the year of return, has been very successful. They raised about $1.8 billion last year. What concrete advice would you be given if you had the opportunity to speak to all the African Americans on one platform?
Well, thank you anyway. Thank you very much, for this. Let me tell you, the George Floyd case is not new. It's not new. Martin Luther King went through a similar experience, although it has nothing to do with his neck, but he was shot. Malcolm X. There are many people who keep dying, and then we keep marching. I'm talking about the Afro-Americans. They keep marching. Now, to say that the last march will be the end, it's not true. Very soon we're going to get another one of those incidents. So there is a need to have a long-term strategy. I don't think marching, just each time somebody is killed, then we march. As tragic as the George Floyd case is, my view here is very, very important. It is important that the African Americans understand that racism has been redefined. It's no longer a matter of the color of the skin. To be honest, our colonial masters, defined us not based on the color of the skin. When they called us black, it has nothing to do with the color of the skin. It has more to do with where they placed us in terms of our mental ability, in terms of our ability to create things, and so many other things. There were a number of assumptions they made, and they say we are black. And then, of course, they put themselves as white. I've never seen anybody who is white. Anytime you see somebody white, you will run for your dear life because you will associate that person with death, to be honest, rather than life. And so the first thing I want the African Americans to do, which is very, very important, is to understand that, that racism is now more economic. It is more of privilege. It is more about value added. When I came to Europe many years ago, I had Chinese and Indian friends. To be honest, they were treated even worse than we Nigerians, because at the time we had this petrodollar economy and everybody respected us. Nobody looked at the color of our skins at the time. It was because we had that economic power. And the way they were treating Indians and Chinese was appalling. Today, Chinese and Indians are almost on top. Everybody eats Indian food here and Chinese food. So one of the things they have to do here, first of all, there is a need to march. If they want to march, one of the march they have to do must be a tangible one. We need to move away from this acceptance of the fact that we are black. It has to be changed. We are Africans. Chinese have never been described as yellow. They are Chinese. Indians have never been described by any, Arabs have never been described by any other color. The more we continue to accept that we are black, it is affecting us emotionally, psychologically, and others. We need to get that narrative changed. And I think the other thing they need to do here is to understand that, like I said, that racism is now more economic. So they need to empower themselves. That's very, very important. Empowering themselves starts from giving good examples. Stop killing each other. And the governments in Africa as well has to help. You can't be killing people in Africa and fail to recognize the impact in the United States. If you are the mother of life, which is Africa, and you are demeaning your own life, you're also sending a signal to everybody else in the world that the life of your indigenes, of your kind, are not actually very important. So that part is crucial. The other thing is that they need to buy from their own kind. They need to do business from their own kind. They need to bank with their own kind. In other words, to create that economic power base so that very soon you're going to have, a black community that is economically empowered, creating jobs. Then they have the opportunity then to invest in the media, which will be an opportunity to speak on their behalf. Then invest in hospitals, invest in politics. These three things will enable them to be able to have that powerful voice, just like Indians, Arabs, and so forth and so on. Now, for coming to Africa, they are always welcome, of course, but we want productive. They have to be productive citizens who will contribute towards Africa. But the long-term solution is America is their homeland. They have to empower themselves and then compete. Racism now is about competition between races, and we can't afford to, lag behind. That is my own view on this.
I mean, Dr. Israel, you said that really, really articulately, and to kind of point the finger to ourselves back in Africa, it almost sounds everything you've prescribed for the Black American community in America could also just be imposed on the African communities, and it would fit in quite perfectly. What's happening on our African soil, Doc? Talking about leadership, how are they failing to bring these things so that the continent can move forward, so that the continent can economically empower itself and its people? Talk to us about what you see as the biggest challenge, the biggest leadership challenge in Africa. And at the end of that question, if you could just tell us perhaps if there's any African leader who really has impressed you, and also just let us know what about that leader you look to for inspiration.
Okay, yeah, very good question. Now, listen, since independence, I mean, my own country, 1960, we've never had very strong leadership. We had very good leaders, but they never had the opportunity to be there. Now, the failings of our leaders stem from a combination of things. That could be almost a different program for it, but let me mention a few. One of them is that they are not educated. I think I've defined what I mean by being educated. And then the second part is that even when you talk about education from the point of view of storing data, some of them don't have it. And so a lot of times, many of them tend to rely on tribes as a defense mechanism. And so tribalism has always been a major factor contributing to our problem in Africa. Now, when I say tribalism, now the problem with tribalism is not only that one is fielding key positions with the relations or close relations, but fielding incompetent people. That is the major challenge. If they were fielding the best of the minds, the best in the country, then you wouldn't have much of the problem we have here. Then the other thing also is corruption. Now, corruption is not just a product of an individual who wants to defraud. We need to look at corruption differently as well. Corruption is a product of an individual who is in office, has no idea of what to do with the money, allocated, the budget. If you are not a trained mind and you become the Minister for Finance, Minister for Trade, Minister for Transport, what do you create? There's no creativity. There is nothing. Investment is about creativity and ideas. An investor is no different from somebody you've made a minister for finance. You're asking that individual to bring in creativity. So when that individual is incompetent and has no idea of what to do, then all they do more often then is to find another means to where, to recycle the money. So these are the actual problems that we have. And to address that, I've said it, we need a new generation of leaders who we have to train to be educated. They can have a PhD, but still not educated. They have to be nurtured to be educated. We need patriots, to come on board. Most importantly, I think I forgot that, the political systems that we are, we are employing throughout Africa, they are quite alien. They don't have any strong connectivity with our value systems, with our culture. It is that of our colonial masters, that is basically, and they gave it to us so that we behave in a way, we run our government in a way that they can understand and manipulate. So it is important that our, so-called professors in Africa that are professing nothing, it's for them to come together. If actually they have the brain to profess, they should come together and begin to devise two things I want them to do. Devise a new education system for Africa. And secondly, a new political system that is suitable for Africa. With these two, I think we can move forward.
All right, Dr. Israel.
Yeah, Doc, I just wanted to pose this question to you. I'm not exactly a student of Lee Kuan Yew, but I know someone who is, and I suspect that you are, because in one of your videos you talked about him. I know that a few years ago, 2017, former President Olusegun Obasanjo launched a book called Making Africa Work with a guy called Greg Mills. And one of the things he told us was that Lee said to them that there was no magic in his own skill, but just to do things simply and keep on doing it better. But simple things, or keep doing it better. But from your own experience or your study of Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, former president of Singapore, whose son is now the president, I might add, what two things can you tell us about Lee Kuan Yew, maybe in a sentence or two?
Lee Kuan Yew, I've been in Singapore. When I traveled to Singapore, it's a very interesting story. I was on the first class and on a business trip to Singapore. And I shared a seat with the managing director of KLM. I didn't know he was managing director of KLM. And then he looked at me and said, "You must be a Nigerian." I said, "My goodness, man, how do you know I'm a Nigerian?" He said, "Well, Nigerians are too clever, and then he said, "Look, let me give you a recommendation. Once you land in Singapore, I want you to buy a book by Lee Kuan Yew. Go and read it. You might be a future leader of your country." That's what he told me. Anyway, I arrived in Singapore and I bought this book for $32 and I read it. My goodness me, what I saw marveled me. Very simple. The thing I like about this guy is that he understood the challenges facing his country. Remember, Singapore is a city-state. He just wants, it's like Lagos. Yes, Lagos is the country, Lagos is the capital, Lagos is everything. And he has been able to transform this one city-state to match every other country, top countries on the planet. Believe you me, the rise of China was based on Singapore. It was the Singaporeans that educated the Chinese to be where they are today. So the great feature of him was that he was a great leader. What is that leadership? He recognized that success in that country depends on employing the best mind who are Singapore, not foreigner, the best. So if you look at the civil service structure, the civil service structure is in competition with the private sector. They pay well, but you must be well educated. And he empowered them. That is just the secret. National, look, sir, let me tell you, no foreigner can develop your own country. It's not possible. So Africa has got some of the greatest minds. Bring them in. That's what Lee Kuan Yew said. Bring them in, empower them. Let them do the stuff. And so basically, that is one of the greatest leaders that I admire so much. You know, yeah. And I forgot there was something that you know, Yasha asked. I think he asked me about the leaders in Africa that I admire.
Yes.
My apologies. I think I forgot about it. Just occurred to me right now. Let me. Do I have time to answer that? Can I answer that?
Yes, please. And then we'll make that the last response. Yes.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Mm-hmm. Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
please.
Go ahead, Prof.
I see. All right. Okay. Look, Nelson Mandela, not that he created wealth for South Africa, but he demonstrated a quality of sacrifice and then the wisdom that is required to navigate a very dangerous minefield. The fact that he was able to calm the Africans, to recognize that they needed the so-called white people, and also to to be able to speak to the black audience about the importance of the white people. Use very powerful mindset to be able to bring about peace. That's one of the greatest things I like about him. It doesn't mean that he succeeded in everything, but at least he left a South Africa in which other politicians, if they follow that same path and then add a little bit more, South Africa will be a great place.